Good evening, everybody. We'll get started here in about 3 minutes. Tonight we'll be doing something a little different. We'll be covering this web application that uses an API to do most of its operation, and we're going to be looking at it, the API, to identify app surfaces in a web app that uses an API. So this will be a little bit different for tonight. What I'd like to do is take these web APIs and build a Terraform module to use it, and then you'll be able to call Terraform and add connections and add users and things like that. But first, you got to identify the APIs to do that. So that's the first step of this. So we'll get started in about 2 minutes. All right. So what you're looking at is the web interface to Guacamole. This is the Apache project. Really cool project. So what Apache Guacamole allows you to do is provide a web portal, and that web portal can provide connections via SSH to systems, RDP, Telnet, and BNC, without having to give up username, passwords, IP addresses, or anything like that. So to show off the example, I have it connected to a dev server, and you can click on this, and that logs you straight into that system as if you're there. And this is great for different networks and environments where you want to have the ability to kind of have all these connections and then not have to worry about like who has what username or passwords or what those are. Again, it depends on your permissions on the server. It doesn't stop you from doing anything. But connections show up down here. So this originally was here, and if you click that, then it shows up as that image as a host, and you can kind of see how many users are logged in, so you can kind of see your server load. So a really cool project. What I use this for is in when I do build automation. I have where I want to automate the ability to add these connections without having to manually do it. And so we'll kind of see that as we break down the API process. So we have burp running in the background, and burp's intercepting all of our requests, and we're just going to again focus in on just the server. So let's go ahead. If you never used burp before, there's various different tabs at the top here. So when you open up burp, your target tab is kind of where you can hone in on what you need to focus on, and then the sitemap gets populated as you're going through different networks or different sites and things like that. And so we want to focus in on just this site, so we're going to add that to scope. Now, Burp now asks you if you want to not accumulate any data from any other sites. So for our purposes, like we only want just what's in our site. So you've added an item to target scope. You want Burp to stop sending out of scope items to history. Avoiding yes will accumulate project data for out of scope items. So yeah, so we don't care about anything else. So it's not going to collect that other. On like a actual web assessment, you might say no because you want to see some of that information, especially if like this site were to call other sites that you need that information. So we're going to just focus in on that. We can go back to our proxy tab, and on the proxy tab, we will see all the different connections that have happened. So there's a little filter bar right here, and this kind of eludes people because it's not obvious here. But when you click this, it'll open up a filter. And so since we've marked what we want for in-scope items only, we can just click, check that mark off, and now it's only going to show just those sites that we've marked. And so this kind of gives you, again, that ability to only hone in on exactly what you need. You can still see on the request items list here, there's going to be numbers missing, and that's because Firefox did something in the background. And again, we filtered out that view. They're still there, but because this was before we said yes that we don't want Burp to collect any more data from out of scope items. And you can kind of see that the dashboard keeps highlighting stuff, and that's because it's letting you know that there's an error for trying to find certain things. Okay, so when I walk through a web application, um, again, I usually like to just walk through it. I like to put in data and play with that data and then see on the proxy what that looks like. And so for Guacamole, there's not much here. You log in, and then if you're a user, you'll have whatever connections were set up for you in this list here. And if you're an admin, then you just have, again, whatever connections were set up. So we're going to click here, and we're going to look at the settings. And so for this one here, again, I already have an active session because I've played with that. And we can see if there's anything that was passed between them. So right now, really all it's been doing is a post, and it's doing a post to API token, and then that's our token there. And then we just responded back with that same token, who the username is, what the data source is, and if there's any available data sources. So we'll highlight this request. This is something that we'll want to make sure we make note of, and that we'll have to make that type of request when we're building out that module for Terraform. So we'll need to know that we need to send API tokens, a post request with that token in order to get another auth token or anything like that. And then so it's making, because using PostSQL database for this build, it's getting that active connections, and that's pulling probably what this was on the page here, this right here. So that's another good API request. Now I only have the build right now set up as Postgres, so that would be interesting if I set it up as something else like LDAP or MySQL. I'm guessing that really all this would change was this right here, the Postgres situation. The rest probably stays the same. We're gonna highlight this one too, just to keep track of this. And then we see shared. There's no response there. So the shared kind of goes back to where we had these two available data sources. And so now we can see the correlation here that it's taking available data sources and then it's making a request on each one of these in this URL. And so that might be a good kind of note as a comment to write down here, is to say, hey, available data sources makes request. So we'll just that way it makes a note, and now we can kind of correlate that later when we're looking at building this out. All right, cool. So some of the functionality that we definitely want to be able to emulate in here is users. So I'll want to be able to add users. You can see that this request here again uses that data source, and it's using both data sources. So we know that once we pull out the available data sources, it seems like every one of our calls is basically going to do the same thing twice. And it's going to do it on each one of those data sources. So it's going to pull PostSQL users and then PostSQL users shared. This is a get parameter, and it includes our token every time. So again, making note of that will help out later down the road when we're building this out. I'm just going to highlight one from now on because we kind of now understand this better. And we can look at the response and see what it was doing. So we get a JSON type data. If you do not have this plugin installed on BERT, JSON Beautifier again makes seeing this data very nice and clean. So we see that we're looking at the Guac admin, and then that has a structure underneath it with a username Guac admin, and then it's pulling its attributes there. And then when it was last active, this time here is probably epoch time, so that's how it's discerning that. Okay, so that's fine. We don't, again, we're just pulling this information, but we want to actually add a user. So we'll just do a new user, and it's going to bring us up to the page. So again, what the web page shows and what's underlining can be different things. And this is where we kind of want to make sure we're watching this really closely. So it did a post to API tokens. This looks like it's just trying to, again, refresh our token because we made a request. Now we're pulling API session data. And now we have a new URL here. We have users groups, permission, update, and then our token. And we do have a team in here. So did that team pull up? Let's see. I don't see that team. So it must be something underneath, some underlying data. So again, this is where watching, what the web APIs are doing, because that can be an information disclosure if that's not what you were hoping for, or that's not what's supposed to be happening. And I've used that before too to pull data that I wasn't supposed to pull. Not in this application, in other applications. We're gonna highlight this one. Again, we're just trying to build out the library of APIs that we're gonna need and gonna be calling. So we know that it's gonna make that same request on the. Oh, so this is actually a different request. This is making a different request to PostSQL schema. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger on the text. Let's see here. Bear with me for a second while there we go. Okay, this is not going to take effect until clarification. Alright, well, we'll have to bear with it. Okay, so now we made a call to the schema user attributes, um, and it is pulling profile, guac full name, guac email address, guac organization. This looks like this is going to be, yeah, there's still no, there's full name. Bet you if we look at this right here, so I just right clicked and then inspect element. And this pulls up the in browser debugger. What we're trying to do is we're trying to correlate what we're going to end up typing here to what those fields will be. And we'll figure that out too a little bit when we post the data. But this is understanding how the application's taking in your data and using it will lead you to find better vulnerabilities in there. So a little bit of playing around at first helps you kind of better manipulate the app and get out what you want. All right, let's just we'll make a highlight of this one. Yeah, there's some access time. So we made a request for the schema. It came back and gave us this information, and then used this information to put somewhere in this web app, which looks like some information's right there, like a full name, yeah, email address, organization, restrictions. There's the restrictions. And then, yeah. All right, cool. So then that's something too, like we'll see when we post that. Um, like in a real web application, then you try to manipulate those variables when you're a lower user. So now we're pulling session data, Postgres, connection groups, root, tree, permission administer. It looks like we're pulling what servers are available. We have a root tree, and that's where this is at, that dev servers under root. Yep, and then you can see that it's calling dev server right there. So then it has an identifier, and then the parent identifier is root. And this tells you the protocol that it's using, which was SSH. Cool. So this is going to be important here. We're probably going to post to that to add new connections and such. And so we'll want to definitely watch this one too. All right, and this is all the same thing on your active connections again. So let's add a user. So we'll just call this test user, and then we'll enter the password of test. Test. And since we're wanting to see the full API functionality, we'll try to fill out as much of this data as possible, because what you'll find is some of this front end that you're looking at here will not put that data into the request unless there's something in there. And so you can't fuzz, APIs or anything like that if you don't know what that looks like to begin with. So filling out as much information as possible helps you fuzz the application later on when you're doing like a web app type test. So for full name, we'll just call him test user. We'll say he is testedexample.com, organization, none. For his account restrictions, we'll allow him access after one scan. Cool. And then do not allow access after And again, we're not really caring what this is. We're just trying to get data filled in so that we can see what the request will look like. Let's just pick that. Since we forgot this up here. So we can see I have a group called Red Team in there, and so we'll add him to the group Red Team. And we're gonna give him access to this, right? Alright, so we're gonna make sure we're at the top call for our burp before we submit this. Another way that you could do this is also turn on intercept. So intercept will then stop the call right here for you to do any manipulations or anything like that, or send it to an intruder or repeater, and then do your manipulations. So we'll send this now. Click save. All right, so now we have a test user right there. So let's go back to our burp history, and there's a couple of posts that we see and such that got accomplished in the background here. And again, all these are part of an API. So again, for that one web function, you have this that all happens. But this is where you have to kind of discern what is actually important, right? So the first request right after we just click save is this one here, is this post. And so we can see that this is the post. Again, we're in the post SQL data. It's a user's URL. It is using our token in there, and then now we can see this data that we actually clicked on, and we can see all the different variables that we clicked on. So again, I can click on JSON beautifier, and that's going to kind of break this out into a nice format. So we definitely want to highlight this one. This is something that we're definitely going to end up doing and haven't had the interesting thing here, though, that we see is that it just has his attributes, and we added different things too, like his group and stuff, and that's not in this one. So let's see what the next request is. And it's an interesting one. It's a patch. So if you ever looked at most web requests, they end up being one of a couple things. A majority of them are gets and posts. Those are usually the two most used methods, HTTP methods. And that's what this is called right here. Get, post. And then you have a delete and an update. And those usually get called in these type of APIs. Patch is very rare, and that's an interesting one to kind of stand out to use, and will hopefully the Go library that we end up using has the ability to do patch, because that's the other thing too. Like if the library only does get and post and maybe update and delete, then we can't call patch, which will be bad. We see the patch is calling users test, so that's our user, right? The one that we just created, and then permissions. And so this is adding the stuff that we were not seeing in this original post that we were talking about. So we're adding, and then we're adding a path, which is connection permissions 62. If you remember, 62 was the ID for that server that we just set up. It can read that, and then we're calling another op add user permissions test update. So again, we said that the user can update stuff and administer. And so this just looks like it keeps calling. The op is probably operations, and then add, and then where that's going to, the path. and then what permission that it's adding. So this is adding all those multiple permissions that we clicked on in there. So we're definitely going to do this one. And it's big to highlight that these three happen right after each other. Because then, yep, there's the next thing. So it got added to the group. So users test group red team. So we're definitely gonna make a note of this. Is we're gonna tie all four of these together. So we want this one, and this one. We're gonna add a comment, and this is created new. And so you saw I just highlighted all three, and then I right-clicked on that and added a comment. And you could add, you could add different colors to this too. Again, so that when you're doing web testing, that you can kind of remember. Well, my light blue was user functionality or something like that. Something to kind of help you remind you what that was looking at. So we did the users, and then after that, look at that, it called API token, so that's probably to refresh our token again. And then now we're calling self effective permissions. So we're looking at ourself, and we have connection permissions, and then read. Guac admin has the ability to read. So this is basically kind of confirming, it looks like, the permissions on everything. We'll highlight this one. I don't know if we'll end up using it for the tool, but again, this would be something that you definitely would want to maybe play with the data that comes back and see if that can give you like a privilege escalation. So what I mean by that is, let's do this. Let's turn intercept on, and then we'll refresh this page. Okay. All right, we don't care about the website this time. All right, so it's going to get this page here. What we want to do is now we want to intercept the responses to this request. But not that one, not that one. There's the response back from that. API languages, we're not caring about. Patches, let's intercept that response back. What we're looking for is when the server sends back the permissions, can you manipulate that? And then some web UIs, what will happen is maybe they'll disable the control and you can't do something with it, but if you intercept the response back, you can bypass that control and turn it on, basically. So there's nothing there on that one. And this is a response, so we're getting the auth token, got the username and such. Now we're making the request, effective permissions. Okay, so this is one that we were definitely looking at before. Change this response. And even though that the post equals shared component, just grab it too. Use it block that mantra. Okay, so now we're getting a response back, and this is the one with our permissions, right? So in Guac, in this application, I'm logged in as an admin, of course. So changing this is only gonna hurt. But what I would do in a normal web app is, if I would ask for an admin user and I would ask for a regular user, and on the regular, as an admin, if I saw this type of stuff, these permissions, then definitely what I would do is copy these permissions and on that user, paste those permissions back when it comes back, and then see in the web UI, does that give me access to stuff? Um, because then all it's really checking is, client side, did you basically get permissions? It's not checking anything on the server. The other flip side to that though too is I would actually try to execute something and see if then it will execute on the server. So I've seen both. Like in a web test, as a low level user, I would add these permissions in, and then my web UI would show me that, oh yeah, you could do this now. So then I would try to do it, and then the back end would actually check like it's supposed to. Some systems don't do that. They again, HTTP is a stateless protocol, so there's no. The only way session data is maintained is if the web application's doing it, and usually the web application's doing it through the session token. And if they're not building an effective permissions um, table in the background behind the scenes, then you can manipulate that to your heart's content. So that's something always to keep in mind. Anyways, that long rant, not needed. All right. So we added a user. We documented that functionality, and the next big one is groups. And so we'll want to see what that takes to add a group now. We'll add a group. We'll call this group test group. We don't want to disable it. We'll just give it these other permissions though. Again, we're trying to, I guess we'll put disable just to kind of see what that's going to be again. You can add parents groups. That's interesting. Member groups. Member users. So we can add users to this. And we can add connections. So let's make sure our burp was to the highest one there. Click save. And so now we did these. So there's our group. Put attribute disable. We're going to highlight this one. We'll put this as green for groups. And then we see a lot of different calls to different functionalities there. We'll highlight all these as green, and then we'll add the comment that this is adding of the group. Some of the other things that would be kind of interesting to see is we know that so the patches is return 2 of 4. So 2 of 4 must be the process. Okay. Let's put our cursor back at the top here. So that's the other thing too, is I'm not seeing, so we have an identifier, but I noticed earlier, let's see what happens when we click it. So we pull, we were here, and yeah, token, okay, let's just freshen our token. There's the test. So we could take whatever group name that we wanted to add and then see if we get a response. So what I'm trying to figure out, and see then there's the read permissions and some other permissions. I'm trying to figure out is if how how this application uses the names of things and does its request. So in order to get its permissions, it just asks test group basically. So these in essence are kind of like, this is a parameter. Like this could be fuzz when you're looking at when you're doing this web app. So I would almost again in a web test, I would put this into a intruder and then I would highlight this as a parameter and then have it fuzz that, or I fuzz that and see what these responses come out. Because changing that should give you different responses, and we could do that if we have. So, so we know the other group is red team, right? So if we did. We did red team. So this one says that. Oh, it's a red space. So spaces is %20. Let's see if that's, accept that. See, yep, and so then that pulled that information there for red team as a group. So then I identified that as a parameter that should be fuzz. This is where you run in. Again, we know in our case we know that this is PostSQL database based on some of this information coming back in the URL and stuff like that. So then that's where I would try my SQL and see, okay, does the application filter this correctly? I'm not doing that tonight. Again, this is not the point of this exercise. The point of this was just to kind of tear apart this API and figure out how it works and such. So I could go careful. Again, I wanted to give you hints too on if you're looking at a web application that has an underlying API, how you can attack it and see if there's stuff there. And so when you're doing this though too, you would want to do. All right, let's do it. I can just show it because it makes more sense. Right, so let's send this to intruder. Okay, so intruders are gonna automatically identify the token as the parameter, and that's not what we want. We identify that this part of the URL is a, and so if you didn't see what I did, as you first click clear, and that clears off the markers, and then you highlight what you want to mark now, and then click add. We're going to be doing a sniper, and then payloads. Again, we know this is querying information in PostSQL, so we would want to do more SQL-based type buttons. And then on options, we'd almost kind of just want to see if there's any flags. So clicking this here, flag results for the responses that matches, it's going to show up and kind of give us an idea if there's any error. So once that's done, click intruder, start attack. And now it's going to try all those. And you can kind of see some quick and easy ones like file not found. So it took that single tick there and the response, and we're saying not found. And you can kind of see down the way. So what I would be looking for here, again, because this is an API, it's not going to be super evident sometimes that there's like a SQL injection. You're looking for something on this message that kind of gives you an idea that something happened. So that's an interesting one. So like we go from this 404 not found to a bad request. Now in this one, it kind of makes sense because there's actual, no, it's still encoded, so that makes sense. So what I was originally going to say is, in a URL, you can't just have spaces. You have to encode it. There has to be a character in every spot. So for it to jump from a 404 to 400, it could be detecting that there's some malicious content and then just rejecting it completely and giving you a bad request, or that could actually be something there. So let's see if there's any others. So we got a lot of 404s. There's another 400. Again, on a query that could make sense for it to be SQL injection. And then, ooh, permissions denied. So, or 0 equals 0 hash. Same thing there. Same thing there. So, not getting a 200. So I know most people are like, oh, if I got a 200, then that means it worked. But these different responses would kind of make me lean to be, okay, well, maybe those are something we should kind of look and format and play with more. We can also right click on this, and because we define this, we can say scan define insert voice. And so now Burp's going to do its automated scanning just on that insert. And that'll list here in the dashboard. So this will do. So that's done. And if you click the view details, it'll tell you the items that came out of there. So input reflected in response. So because you can put that information there, it probably said, yep, something not found. And so this is again where you can see, okay, does this really lead to cross-site scripting or anything like that? It'd be self cross-site scripting. Well, you could send someone a link, except then they will be logged in as you for the token. But if this JSON is used in the application and not formatted back to HTML, then correctly, then that could lead to a cross-site scripting. There was also a file path manipulation. So here we're doing, looks like it's going down the directory, and that gave you permissions thing. Yeah, this is doing dot slash, and it said no. Nothing came out of the SQL injection on the scanner. Again, might be due to some manual insertion, manual playing around, that kind of thing where I would look at that a little bit more. Again, not the point of what we were trying to originally do, but just something to kind of highlight how web applications work with APIs. All right, so back to what we were looking at. When we click on the test group, we can kind of see this information here. It's fine. It just pulled the user group test group, and then I got no data back. So then we can see what happens if we try to click these away. We take away some of those properties and click save. What's that request look like? And we get a new request. So now we're getting a put. We'll highlight that here. It just says a 204. And then we got a patch on permissions. And then, so now we're doing operations of remove. Okay. So we're going to highlight all these. We'll make that a light blue like we did with the other one for groups. And then we'll add a comment to say removed from groups. All right. And then one thing we did not do is look at the users and do that. So clicking on the test user. Let's see what happens when we take away restrictions and stuff like that. But it also does a put in a patch. So now we're kind of understanding that it does an action on the users or the group's URL, and then the patches is more for permissions and adding additional content to that. We had green for users before. We're gonna say it removed. All right, so let's look at what else we got. So we have connections. So this is where you add in connections. We're going to do a new connection. And we only have one location, which is root. So we probably want to add different ones and see how that handles that. But we don't have to do that right now. So let's just name this one as test. We have the location as root, cool. We can select different functions. Now, the web page kind of changes based on the functionality. So we're going to have to redo this page a couple of times. So we can kind of see how there's no RDP now. And then if we do telnet, we'll see. We can see if the web application, yeah, so it's pulling information in the background too to kind of pull up the schema for how to handle that based on the selection. Yeah, here's telnet. I won't go into this in the stream, each one of these. We'll just do one. So we'll do RDP. We'll say maximum number of connections, 5, maximum number of users, 1. Our guacamole is not going to be doing load balancing. Again, if you wanted to fully test this and stuff, you should probably put data in here. Same thing with the guac front. Select one. Hosting. So we're just filling out data here. What we want to do again is get as much into the post so that the application, so that we can duplicate that functionality. I'd be messing up. People pick a different keyboard command. Some of this might allow us to do multiple things like disable audio and then support audio. There might be a checkboard for you can't have both. And that would be good to know kind of right now. Say one of your redirected printer name. Enable drive, sure. Oh, drive name, so then that would be and the direct path. Sure. So there's a lot of options for RDP as well. That's kind of cool too. So to support a username and password or a private key and a passphrase, you could have a key that you put in here that has a passphrase. And again, like I said, the main purpose of Guacamole is to have a web portal for users to go to that can just click into a system without having to give them a username and password and keys and things like that. And that's what we're trying to automate too, is have this one-click functionality where it spins up an environment and then creates a connection to that environment. Cool. So that's gonna save that. We'll see how bad this request was. Alright, so that is our connection for this one post. Especially since the other stuff kind of before was a bunch of puts and patches. So I'll just add a comment here being RDP. And then it refreshed its token and then pulled all the effective permissions. Cool. Preferences. Doesn't look like anything that you're gonna mess with. Connections. We can add a new group here. This could be test, and then it's gonna be group. Organization or balancing. Okay. Maximum number of connections, 5, sure. Let's see what this does. We're gonna highlight that one too. So that's adding in the group, and then what we're gonna do is add new group um, connections, and then we'll add something in next. Let's see what that is. So there's an identifier associated with groups. Yeah, look at that. So now you can create a new connection in a group. Let's do this one real quick. So all I did was just put in that first number again. So you can see that connection in there. See what that does. So the parent identifier 5 there. And see, that's the VNC, and that's the one I typed in. So now we're able to kind of understand that when you create a new group or whatever, it uses that parent identifier to kind of keep track of where it needs to go under. And that's interesting to know because you could effectively add this to multiple. So again, as a user, if I had permissions to add to one group, like we were changing our permissions before, then I would iterate this number and see if I can add stuff to other groups. And then again, that would be kind of more of a privilege escalation or privilege task being executed outside of what I'm supposed to be able to do. We're just going to say add connection, group, connection, group. Okay. We can add another group just to see what happens. So now you can kind of see that this is under that tree. +2. Why not, right? And something tells me that the parent identifier is going to be 5. Yeah. So that's all it did, was just identify as the parent identifier. And then that's going to assign it identifier 6. So that's the other thing that we need to figure out is, okay, how do I find these identifiers when a user is going to add them? How do I find that and make that into a call? Because users are going to want to do, I want to add it to this. They're not going to know the identifier. This was a new group. Under test group connections. So there's a filter. So if we do test 2, look at that, it brings up stuff. And then let's see if that gets API. If that's just on the page. So yeah, I'm not seeing this pull up anything here. We did have so we got the connections here. If we reload this page, actually, so I'm holding down Shift and pushing the reload because I want to force it to reload all the data. We can look to see if it pulls that in one of these GET requests. So what we're looking for is that JSON data coming back that so there's the patches, there's the tokens, there's our permissions, okay, so connection groups, and this is calling root the tree. And so we can see here under child connection groups, right? Then we got name test, and there's identifier, and then you can see the parent identifier. And then in there we have another child connection group and child connection. Okay. So that's how it's building its tree out in the GUI. So it's taking this JSON data here and it's parsing it, right? So it's looking for, all right, first give me child groups and child connection groups. So we get this, and the top one is going to be test, and then we have a child connections as another thing, and that's dev server. Yeah, so dev server, test, and then there's a test connection. Yep, so there's a test connection. So child connections, you can see here it has two different sections, right? And so we have the first section here is that one, and there's an identifier, the 62. And then the second portion of that is another test, and that has 63. And you can see the protocols and the parent identifier. So this is parent identifier group. All right, so then the other portion then is child groups connection, and that's basically looking at this one here. Those are groups, and that should be a test. Yep, there's test. That has an identifier that's pointing back to the group parent. And then in there, this has two members. It has child connection groups, which there's only one in there, and then child connections. Right here. And I bet you if we add another group or another child, it'd just be copied, just kind of like similar down here. This section right here would be the same. Okay, so we're gonna highlight this one, and we're gonna add a comment to say possible connections, names to ID, because that looks like our best candidate to kind of query and pull data out. We'll have to do some parsing of that data, but let's see if there's any others. There's another one there. This looks like it's the same group tree. Yeah, this is permission to update. Okay, cool. What other parts of the API that we need to look at? Again, we're just looking to add users and we want to delete 63. Okay. So in repeater, if I try to delete the same group, it's going to say not found. Now, if I change this number to 63, oh, because it's connection groups. Connection. There, internal connections. There we go. So using connections, if we refresh our page now, test will be go away. There it goes. So we were definitely on the right track there, figuring out kind of the call. Now though, the only problem is that it wasn't saved on query. So we only have that one delete there. Oh, we can delete the other one. That way we know no edit connection. you. Comment. Okay. And now let's see how we delete groups. So we've got our test group here. We delete that one. Group. There's the delete request. So for the groups, it's just calling it in here, in the URL. It's not using an ID or anything like that. Okay. And we'll go to the user. We'll delete the test guy, and then that's going to be it. I think we successfully kind of reverse engineered this API. Got that to do what we need to. So users test. So the only one that it does not do that with is the connections. Connections needs the ID. So we have to figure out the ID. And that's where we need to pull that parser information from. We'll have to build a little parser into the module to query and then parse based on it. Alright, I'm going to save this project. Call it, hey, we'll call it squawk. RE. We'll save the in-scope items. That'll save you some space. We don't need to include that. Yep, squawk test. That sounds good. Bam. Alright, thanks everyone for joining tonight. I hope you learned something. I hope you can see how you can look at a website and then look at the underlying API and start kind of breaking that down into the functionality, and then hopefully finding targets to kind of fuzz and get responses out of. Hope you all had a good night, and see you all next week. Thanks.